Looks like I am live a few minutes early. Don't worry, I won't start for another 6 minutes. Looks like I am live a few minutes early. Don't worry, I won't start for another 6 minutes. Looks like I am live a few minutes early. Don't worry, I won't start for. Yeah, that's better. Four minutes remaining. Hello. Yay, people are chatting. So I hope you have a lot of questions. I'm probably going to talk for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll have some extra time for questions. And hopefully we won't bother my team behind me too much. I was supposed to set up in a different room, but couldn't get the audio working, so here I am at my desk. Oh yeah, I guess I should tweet about this. We have 3 minutes left, so there's time for a tweet. There's a tweet. Yep. Pretty much. Hello, experimental AI and games. Got a cool desk, a cool hat, and a cool stream. That is correct, Polar Techie. Everybody's shouting out the toady one. Hi, darn. That's what I have to say about another 2 minutes of letting people filter in. Hello, giant room of people I can't see. This is the future. I guess this Perrier isn't as acidic. Let's design a stronger environment back here for you to look at. There you go. It's better probably. me in the plant, teaching you about AI. Hi, safe and night. Looks like we're starting at 2 a.m. your time. Welcome, Australian insomniacs. You're very welcome. I believe Cut Garnet. That's Mike, correct? Appreciate being asked. So while I give my talk, I'm probably going to not have the chat live because that would be very distracting. So if you have questions, it's totally fine to put them in the chat. Just be aware that at the end of the talk, if it's scrolled off, you might need to ask it again because I'm going to ask for more questions once I'm done. Because it's a lot harder to keep track of people raising their hands in this kind of setting. So here we go. It's 11 o'clock. Do I have the go-ahead, Joe? And Mike, and whoever else is running this thing. All right, Safe and Nice requested a bang. All right, here we go. So, designing stronger AI personalities. You might be warned, I'm not really an academic. I'm an industry person. I do a master's degree, but it's not in AI, it's in level design. So what this is going to be is more of a post-mortem of sorts of the different AI struggles I've been involved in and the things that I learned from them. So I am the designer and captain of Kit Fox Games. We're about 4 years old. We started working together in 2013 and we've released a few games. These are my co-founders here in the middle. Jongwoo Kim is our tech lead and Sin-Run Liu is our lead artist. And this is a party we went to and this is our cake. It's great. And we kind of try to specialize in intriguing worlds. So our first game that we came out with was Shattered Planet. It had relatively simple AI, and it was mostly the generation of the level itself that was kind of interesting. And then a couple of years later, we released Moon Hunters, which is more of a co-op game. And the AI here that was interesting was about generating responses to players trying to express their personality and generate a myth surrounding those personalities. And just this summer, we published The Shrouded Isle, which has generated villager vices and virtues for the cult that you're running. And recently we've been working on secrets that will be announced in a week and a half, so you can ask me more about this image in a couple of weeks. But before Kit Fox Games, I was also a dynamic gameplay designer and an AI designer at Funcom, which is a Norwegian company, and I was on The Secret World and Age of Conan. Yeah, all right, well, I guess I shouldn't have just started rambling. Oh well, sorry. I was told to wait. Should I take a break now? What do you think? What do you think, Joe? I'll try to keep this in the side so I can see any urgent call-outs here. I'll take a 30-second. Hold on. Okay, I'm told I should continue. I have a few different apps open here. Let's see if I can somehow make room for seeing all of them at the same time. Yeah, that's a little better. Okay, here we go. Okay, we're gonna keep rolling. So I started out as an AI designer, and that was kind of a glorified word for scripter, but I was designing boss fights and NPC behavior, so I guess technically it worked. In The Secret World, I was more of an independent senior designer. And so when I started thinking about ways to make our AI better, I kind of got lost in this swamp of what is a person? How does a person think? What are all the things that influence the ways that they think and the way they behave? How can I show that to players more effectively? And I got kind of in this idea of externalities and internalities and like what are the various motivations that people have. And of course there's decades or hundreds of years of research on psychology and sociology, but I think as far as games are concerned, you could kind of develop this theory of why people are doing things and then what they do, and by manipulating these 4 different quadrants of AI inputs and outputs, you could develop different ways of handling character behaviors and showing their personalities. But I actually don't think this is particularly useful unless you already know some things about what your game is trying to do. Any one of these quadrants might be completely irrelevant to your game experience, or it might be what your game experience is hinging on. Some of these are irrelevant, for example, to The Sims, but they're crucial to Crusader Kings 2 personalities. So what I think is more important for you to start thinking about is how you're guiding the player's interpretation. So, for example, whether it's motivation or behavior, typically there's this circular logic problem where in real life people can think about, for example, abrasive people. They are abrasive because they insult people, and also they insult people because they're abrasive. And trying to figure out which way your player thinks about it is important, because if you start out on one side, it feels very different. If you're observing, oh, this person has this trait, for example, maybe you hear about it through a rumor, or a UI element tells you that this person is abrasive, then you'll be looking for behavior. Whereas in the other way, if you just see behavior and you are expecting a certain personality trait, that's much closer to traditional media. In books and movies and in real life, we kind of observe what people do, and then we interpret what their personality trait is. And to us, that's a very, I would say even maybe instinctual joy, is noticing a pattern within other people's behaviors and then describing that about them. Getting to know them is kind of this kind of gameplay. But it's very unusual for this to happen with AI in games. In games, it tends to be that when people try to do this, it ends up being too subtle and people don't really notice, which is a different problem, but we tend to apply it backwards, actually. And I mean, in traditional media and in real life, there's many things that kind of cue someone's personality. Part of it is what they wear, or how they hold themselves, or how their face is arranged. Their resting face might tell you something that you believe you can know about their personality, whether it's true or not. And a lot of things do feed into stereotypes of gender and race and all sorts of other markers. And so what ends up happening is if you do just kind of randomly assign a bunch of visuals to a character, you'll start to project different personalities from them, right? And this is a little bit of a shortcut of sorts. You're not really learning about whether this person, is obedient or not just because he's wearing a waiter's outfit, but that's what you're going to start to think about. It's more interesting when you start actually observing a character and you see their different actions, what they try to do, what their habits are, and what they avoid. And those kinds of things are much more subtle, but they actually are literally what makes up a person's personality that's observable. And so it's interesting to me that AI tends to go the other way. And I think it's because we tend to show the personality trait up front and then look for confirmation of it because we're really worried about it being interpreted as random. We don't want people to think that our characters are just doing stuff, so we kind of feed the superstition and the constellation making impulse of people to really look for confirmation of the trait that we tell them is there. And I think either way can work. I'm personally very interested in more experiments that come from the first type, the more natural human type. But if you go the other way, I think you also have a lot more examples that you can learn from that are existing games. So if you know which way you're going, like let's say that you decide to make a system where you don't show the traits up front. This is a little bit dangerous because So when I was working on Age of Conan, I had played the game for a month. I joined the live team a month after launch, and I arrived behind the scenes and opened up all the scripts, and I was mildly horrified / fascinated to find that every single non-player character had a Maslowian hierarchy of needs, that all of the thousands of soldiers that I had hacked down over the hours was first trying to stay safe, and then they were trying to get food, and then they were trying to sleep, and then they were trying to actualize their ambitions. I'm not joking or exaggerating here at all. Literally all of the random trash mobs in Age of Conan do this, and it's a beautiful system, but there's two problems with this. One, there's no sign that that's what they're doing. As far as I could tell, the soldiers were just randomly going into their beds, or maybe they were scripted. I mean, as a player, I had no reason I had no inputs on my side that made me think that they were making intelligent AI decisions. And on the other hand, there were no expectations set either. It's not like it was a marketing beat or anything like this. And even if it had been, even if, you know, lots of MMOs claim a living, breathing world, and what does that mean exactly? Because it means different things to different games, right? And so even if I think it had marketed to me saying that it had these Maslowian hierarchy soldiers, A, I'm not sure why, but B, I wouldn't know what to expect as a player, even as a highly educated player. And so that kind of explains a little bit about why games like the beloved Dwarf Fortress might expose a lot, like everything. And it's partially this thing that if all of this were hidden, if all of this were secret, it would just look like little dwarves doing random things. But instead, you can kind of project onto it like, oh, he rarely feels discouraged. So if you go look at him, even if he does feel discouraged in that moment, well, it feels rare, it feels interesting, like, oh, you found an interesting moment. You're getting more information out of it. And so it requires more on the part of the player to sort through all this, but at the end of it, they can kind of make their own mental model of what's going on, which makes your own model seem more interesting. And even in Civilization, you know, a very high budget, very iterated game, I mean, they expose basically everything. The longer the series has gone on, the more they've shown about what's going on beneath the hood. There's just literally UI that tells you what they feel about everything. And if they do hide something, they specifically call it out as a hidden thing. They don't just actually hide it. They call it a hidden, look, there's something hidden here, which I think is very smart. And so in the Shrouded Isle, we kind of took this approach as well to vices and virtues, where we actually called it out with little question marks that say you have something undiscovered here, and that kind of spurs the player on to really continue examining and really try to understand the AI at a deeper level. And I think if we hadn't done that, I think a lot of people would have just figured, oh, well, that's just a boring person. They only have one trait. And they wouldn't have continued to try to understand the AI, which is part of the gameplay. On the other hand, I think when you do look at AI personalities, like let's say you're looking at the big 5 motivations as part of your theory of how your characters are going to behave, it's tempting to say, well, the average person has average traits in some ways, like they're, you know, moderately neurotic, or they're sometimes extroverted. And I think that that's also dangerous, because if you have a character who's just irritable, for example, they're going to look kind of normal. They're kind of going to look samey as the character who's kind of nice. Whereas if you have a character who's extremely nice versus a character who's extremely irritated or wroth in the parlance of Crusader Kings, then those characters are clearly different. I think actually extremifying some of the traits makes sense. And not only that, but also calling out when those traits have an effect. So again, in the Shrouded Isle, if someone's accusatory, you can clearly see when they start accusing people of things. And people who are not accusatory don't do those same behaviors. I would also beware traits that cause passive or unbehaviors. The Sims is really interesting because when you look at things like shy or lazy, you might assume that it means a lack of something, like a lack of outgoingness or a lack of activity. But in reality, the only reason those traits are interesting is because they have active. Shy literally has a turn away behavior. Lazy literally has like a sleep in behavior. So it's always observable. Whenever you have very, very passive traits, it can be very hard for the player to notice a lack of something. And I think one of the most popular and successful characters in, oh geez, I just forgot this character, King of Dragon Pass. In King of Dragon Pass, the trickster type is one of the more appealing because he's one of the more extreme, he's one of the more active. He tends to actually go out and cause trouble, whereas the other advisors' differences are a little more subtle and harder to see. I think the trickster also is more popular because he or she is funnier. I think when you're designing AI and you're creating gameplay that is about observing AI, I don't think you're in the right frame of mind to really think of them as people. Like, you can't really invest in system-driven characters the same way as authored characters in the same moment that you're also asking players to think about their game mechanics. So it's possible for them to graduate from that. Maybe players can start thinking mechanically and then graduate into thinking of them as real humans. But at the start, I mean, you're really exposing the gears, right? And their symbols. I mean, it's almost like the classic joke is, you know, an insert noun and an insert noun enter a bar, and like that's the kind of person that you're showing them at first. Eventually, maybe they can move past that. But in the meantime, I think that the fact that AI can be kind of funny is actually a value. Like, trying to not make something funny is maybe an uphill battle. Like, why are you going against the grain a little bit? Now, on the other hand, when I asked this of David Dunham, the designer of King of Dragon Pass, and soon 6 Ages coming out, keep an eye out for 6 Ages, he actually said that he disagreed with most of my points, which I think is fascinating. I mean, King of Dragon Pass is a great example of something that's not particularly funny most of the time. At least the humor that is there is authored, not procedural. And it is subtle in a lot of ways, and it's very dramatic. And in all of these ways, you know, it succeeds. And so I think all of them are risks, but maybe they're all risks that are cohesive together. So that's just worth noting that these are what I think are the safer things to do, but maybe you should still calculate which risks you want to take with your AI. And then I also felt like it was important in any procedural AI situation to allow the player to investigate what went on. So, for example, in Moon Hunters, the myth is always there for you to actually see what all of the different elements were. It doesn't just at the end proclaim you cunning. And I mean, if you have a lot of moving parts going on with your AI, it might be very satisfying for players to be able to rewind or examine different elements. And one thing that we integrated into Shrouded Isle as well is the idea that reactions are a faster way of internalizing personalities than proactive behaviors. If one thing is happening, the way 2 different characters respond can tell you about those 2 characters in the exact same moment, whereas normally you'd have to wait for one person to act and then the other person to act. But in this example, in this screenshot, for example, if someone's died, you can tell the difference between these 2 characters very quickly. And similarly, you might even have a crowd of characters in Red Shirt. You know, you can see over here on the right that it's, you know, 3 different characters are jealous, and so you immediately know about all those 3 people. And in the Shrouded Isle, during events, we felt like it was important not only to show that somebody had accused, but also that other people were offended by that action. And so that tells you more in a shorter amount of time. And finally, my final tip is to change it up. People change a lot over the course of their lives, and I think we're kind of used to drama justifying almost any transformation in someone's personality. And as long as the transformation is actually, you know, drawn out so that the player can see it happen, you can kind of make it whatever. Like, I actually asked Tyler, the designer from Darkest Dungeon, I was like, well, what kind of logic were you using? And he was like, it's basically random. There are some transformations that are limited to certain areas or things like that for content reasons, but which trait goes to which other trait doesn't matter. What matters is, like, on the side of the player, what they see as, okay, if somebody goes from confident to hopeless in a moment of crisis, that tells me something different than if somebody goes from hopeless to confident during a crisis, right? So these are my 8 learnings from designing stronger AI personalities. If you have a strong idea of how the player is going to interpret the AI, then that can inform the rest of how you design your systems, how you surface them to the player, and how you make them not just stronger in terms of flavor, but stronger in terms of writing quality, in terms of narrative potential, both in potentially semi-authored narratives and emergent narratives. Thank you. That was a bunch of rambling. So now we can see if anybody has any questions. Yeah, so Mike mentions that, the Darkest Dungeon approach is definitely that it shows you up front, this is their personality trait, and then you look throughout the game at how they're behaving, and then it changes and you can observe the differences there. Applause! Yay, applause. Hello, thank you. Someone asks, do you think it's harder to show personality when it doesn't have a mechanical impact? Yes, of course. Of course, you know, if it's just a +2 to strength and then, or even less, maybe it's literally just a decorative element. I think it's almost impossible to show. But I think sometimes people define mechanics as being much more of a big deal than they actually are. I think if you were to play test just putting a label on something of what their personality is that's flavor text, people would still get a kick out of it. I think humans are naturally geared to want to see personalities, and they're just kind of intrinsically interesting. So I feel like we could brainstorm interesting ways to show personalities, even if there isn't clear mechanics behind it. Why use transformation sparingly? It looks like a good mechanic for a live AI. Personally, I think if you overuse it, it'll become very clear to the player that it's random and they shouldn't get invested in that character. I mean, this gameplay of noticing and observing patterns kind of requires that you feel like that invested energy and intellectualism is beneficial, that you have actually achieved something when you can predict what somebody's going to do. Like, that's the act of getting to know someone. So if they're transforming all the time, I think the power of that moment is lost, and rather than making the character seem more alive, they'll make them seem more mechanical. That's my feeling, but I haven't written a whole talk on that, so maybe you can disagree. Someone asks, you mentioned there's a difference between characters when you expose the mechanics versus hide them, Civilization versus Mass Effect. What drives that decision for you? Well, I'd be interested to see if there were a procedurally generated personality in Mass Effect, if hiding it would actually work very well. And yeah, as Marius says, if you don't have any feedback, then you might not know there's any AI. And for me, I mean, it is a little bit of a marketing question. It's a little bit of a product design question, which I know is maybe not as relevant in the academic sphere, but as far as being a company leader, it's definitely important to each of our games that we ask, what is appealing about this game? So for example, the secret screenshot that I teased earlier does not have any procedural personalities. And that's because part of our marketing is that we want these characters to be likable. We want these characters to get to know them is very much an authored experience. Whereas in the Shrouded Isle, part of the marketing, part of the appeal of the game is that you're trying to sort out this puzzle of what kinds of people are living in your village, where are the sinners, how do you identify who should be sacrificed, that kind of thing. And so it just really depends on where your gameplay is centering. I feel like in an ideal situation, even in that first game I was talking about, where you have all these likable, getting to know characters, if those were all procedural, that would be amazing. But it would also be a waste of our resources if we can spend much less and just author 5 characters that are likable. But yeah, the first person that makes a dating sim or something where I can date procedural people that are all infinitely attractive, that'd be great. Please do contact me about that. Someone asks, do you think it's too much to put in a game what a character really is like versus pretending or acting? Like a cowardly elf might act confident if combat or orcs aren't nearby. I think that is adding a layer of difficulty. Deception is actually a point that I cut from this talk at some point, but it's actually very relevant. It's funny how the only examples I could find of successful deceptive AI were the worst liars I've ever seen. Like they would literally declare, I'm lying to you now, and then tell you a lie. Although I feel like even authored content sometimes errs on that side. Gamers do not like being deceived. So I think it could work. I think you might end up in a situation where you need to expose even more. Like in the Dwarf Fortress example, like let's say that dwarf had, like he lies all the time or he hides his cowardice. That might work. But I do think it'll be a little bit of an uphill battle. I think one counterexample is actually, again, King of Dragon Pass. The trickster, I believe, sometimes tries to act reasonable. And so, not just get disregarded immediately because you detect they're a trickster. And so it's a little bit of a secretive, like, who here is leading me astray kind of thing. So it can work. And I hope more people try it because it's definitely a fantasy that an AI could be lying to you, right? That's almost like a Turing test kind of thing. In your Conan example, you brought up marketing. What role do you think marketing plays or should play in players' perceptions? I think it's an unavoidable truth that your game is what players believe it is. Whether it's the players that actually play the game or the players that would have played your game if they had known what it was. And from that perspective, I feel like design and marketing in the best of worlds is very intertwined, because if you're going to make a great game, you have to not only have the appeal, know what the appeal is, integrate it into the game, but also be able to demonstrate that appeal to the players, hopefully before they play, but at the very worst, while they play. So I think it's very difficult to pull the two apart, and that's why marketers and designers fight a lot, because if they're not 100% aligned, then they both feel that it is their responsibility to fight to get it aligned. Let's see, one person says, it was impossible to get around, yeah, poor Conan. It had some interesting flavor. Someone says, can we mention that KitFox has a new game announcement coming? I'm really excited. Yes, you can. You can absolutely say, watch KitFox. Next week there's going to be some interesting announcements. Or maybe the week after. We're still finalizing the announcement. But it's going to be good, you guys. Even though it won't really have AI personalities. Sorry, a little bit off topic. And I guess that's it for me. So I can pass it off to Tarn, I guess. Oh, no, one more question. What do you think of multimedia, such as tie-in stories or animations that flesh out game characters like Overwatch? I think it's kind of cowardly. I'm a game designer, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I think that if the personality isn't really part of the gameplay at all, I mean, I think that Overwatch is an interesting example of how character personalities are absolutely influenced by their barks and their responses to things, or their one-liners, and it's a blurry line where that implementation of AI personality is different from Left 4 Dead, let's say, where I would say Left 4 Dead has a very interesting approach to triggering little mini in-game cutscenes between characters, kind of the Half-Life style storytelling. And I'd love to see more of that in something like Overwatch, which, I mean, I've never played. Maybe it happens, I don't know, but I haven't heard about it. So the short answer is that the multimedia is a shortcut, and maybe it's the best shortcut if your game doesn't permit strong personalities, but I would be interested to see more of that. Yeah. And imagination is the best graphics card. That's why we're so excited to hear Tarn talk, right? Because, I mean, I played text-based MMOs for many years, and some of those AI had pretty great personalities in my imagination. And in reality, even though, I texted lots of interesting images with those textual characters. All right, thank you very much. Have a good day, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Uh-oh. So there's no audio? Where has my audio gone? There's no audio. Oh, hey. Well, maybe I should sing a little less then. Okay, so yeah, I guess we're not starting for a bit. I mean, I guess it's 9:45 is the time, uh, and that's what I tweeted out anyway. Yeah, sorry. Yes, the river knows. Dun-dun. Please believe me, the river told me. That's not what we want, you know. Uh-oh, you lost the stream. There we go. Hello. That's right. It's gonna be the number one cause of disconnects. Is it gone? Yeah, this is gonna be a trip. Oh wait, no, it came back. Yeah. You always call them scraps. It's scamps. It's not like scamps is an actual word or anything. Okay, so I guess the conference people run the show. So should I start early or should I hang out here? I don't know how many angry Twitter people there are going to be storming in here and throwing rocks at me. So it's up to the official yellow um, chat person there. That would be Joe, I believe, controls all things. Someone is very interested in this internet cable. I don't think this is going to work. This is not working out very well. Okay, yeah, that sounds like there's an archive. That's right. So the whole live nature of the thing is sort of whatever the word is you'd insert there. All right, so we got slides. We got a talk that's gonna last who knows how long, but I'll stick around for questions. I have one hand on my cat's head trying to keep it away from my connector. Can't lock him out or it'll just be like all the time. So, um, okay. So secret identities in Dwarf Fortress. I may check periodically over. I don't know how Tanya's set up so you can see the whatchammer at the same time here. Let me reduce this for a second. Uh-oh, my slides have gone. Where have my slides gone? Oh, wow. That reduced down to the corner there. This is very, very weird now. Are they still large enough? That's incredibly weird. So right now, are they large enough to see? No, actually, I can't see them, so forget it. All right, so I guess I have my Skype on, so Joe is responsible for yelling at me if the stream dies. All right. Is it good? Is it good now? Because I'm just gonna jump into it if it's good now. And just I'm glad you're enjoying yourselves here. I do have a little cough, by the way, if I have a little hack here. Okay, everything's good. Here we go. All right. I look like a high wire artist or something. I've got my arms out trying to keep this cat away from me, but okay. So secret identities in Dwarf Fortress. This is the paper I submitted to the conference or whatever the noun is we're using for it is assumes knowledge of Dwarf Fortress, so I don't have any kind of sort of blurb about what the game is. The game I write with my brother Zach, fantasy world simulator, that kind of thing. We're just gonna just pretend it's a game or something, and we'll be fine. So what we're doing in Dwarf Fortress now is for the next release is adding these named objects, these sort of artifacts or whatever, that kind of like the ring or whatever are just going to be important story elements that are worked into all of the narratives and so on, almost like characters themselves. And because there's no sort of omniscient knowledge in the game, there's like rumors that pass around and so forth. We had to add, this is the quality that you're going to have to expect for the rest of this, by the way. The characters can sort of talk about, oh, I saw this person holding this object, or they can pass a rumor around saying that, oh, this person stole this object. And as those rumors pass around, the sort of civilizations and individuals can update their goals and go and maybe try and steal it themselves, or they can engage in diplomacy to pass the object around and so forth. But the problem we encountered sort of immediately with this is that the goblin, lovingly rendered on the right side there, is they're not able to participate in this process, even though they've got their whole sort of civilization and towers and pits and so forth. They don't interact with people other than sort of attacking them with armies and kidnapping their children. So this was, of course, they could sack a place and walk off with an object, but they couldn't figure out where they were, so they couldn't get their things back and so forth, you know. And so we decided our solution for that, instead of like having ring wraiths riding around terrorizing villages and torturing and interrogating people, would be to add spies to the game. So we have the ability to bring information into the system. in that fashion. So now the reason that we kind of went with this as opposed to any of the other options is actually kind of since we were kids, my brother and I have kind of wanted to make a spy game, sort of inspired by this is a Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, the John Le Carré novel adapted into this sort of mini series here with Alec Guinness. And it's very subdued. It's not James Bondy at all. That scene there is typical of it. People just kind of looking things up, and there are sort of subterfuge and dead drops and that kind of thing. But it's not sort of about superheroes or anything. Although it's funny watching it as kids because the dialogue can be very catty. But it's strange to watch it again as an adult and realize all this kind of horrifying subtext that was being passed around. But in any case, we wanted to make a game. We've tried in the past to kind of do this, have a directed game that was about spying and had these sort of mechanics you could do that with, think about how it would work. If it ended more like a puzzle game or something, we really needed to have a world to play off of for espionage to feel like it was living in a space where the little tricks and so forth made sense in a larger context, and you could kind of find targets for your operations in a larger context. So we have that with Dwarf Fortress. It's been very convenient over the years to have like this whole giant game to throw stuff into, right? So we have that to work with, and we decided the first step would be to kind of give the goblins that are going to be infiltrating these places secret identities. Sort of a whole extra layer of information on top of the system, right? And that's what I'm going to engage with now. So we had them in the game already. This is a vampire infiltrating a fortress. We had a sort of simple identity system where it would add a structure on top of them when they migrated to your fortress that gave them a new name, a fake birthday in case they had lived for thousands of years. When they're in their natural habitat, they'd be kind of like decked out in like tooth jewelry and stuff that they had like taken from their victims and so forth. So they ditch all that. And they were not impossible to find. People would locate them and then weaponize them and so forth, as the players tend to do. But it worked well enough. We have this kind of interface mechanism of using secret identities to sort of mess with the player more or less when people started to die in the fortress, found drained of blood, and you'd have to figure out who did it. But now with this new system, it was kind of true with the vampires already, but now especially, we had the trouble, especially with the player there with their little pea belly. You actually go and talk to individual people about specific facts in the world, and then suddenly those identities just aren't very strong anymore. Now, of course, one of the main problems here is that that's like a goblin in like a town or something, and it's kind of obvious. I mean, we do have a little goblin diaspora type thing going on, but it's still, this is not a very good disguise for the goblin. I mean, you could tack stuff onto him, which we did, and it's kind of the main addition was, I've got a profession, I've got an object of worship, perhaps a belief system that's in line with the civilization I'm infiltrating. I've got my fake affiliation that maybe I'm pretending to be this particular order of monks or something like that, or I'm pretending to be a criminal from this group, but you're still a goblin, right? So now we have dwarves, and it's great that they were around. I mentioned the kidnapping before, right? So these we kind of intended this all along, but never really had a reason to use it. That these children grown to adulthood in the Goblin Towers, raised in the Goblin Society, could be used as better infiltrators. So it actually, when they're picking a town to infiltrate, it checks through sort of the population list and picks either a excuse me, a dwarf, human, or elf child, or maybe a goblin. Like I said, there can be a diaspora, but you can then send them in and be much less likely to be detected. And having this now, these conversations, means that all of the rumors, everything about the game in this this part of it, had to be given like new data structures. Like, okay, now we're talking about the person that stole this or that, but only by their secret identity, or only by their visual appearance, or only by their original name that they grew up with. And all of the sort of relationships that people had with people, their reputation, whether these things that they've actually seen and rumors that are passing around is all part of that. We kind of dynamically calculate a lot of the reputation with the knowledge in people's heads and the affiliations they have and so forth, had to be kind of linked into these new secret identities, so that the person on the left might have fond feelings of the person on the right under this secret identity. But they can also have that broken up by, by sight. I think of the person this way. When I hear a rumor about them by their birth name, I think of them this way. And then when I hear that such and such is rampaging over this village, which is actually a secret identity for the same person, I have a whole nother set of sort of reputations and events associated with that. And, as you kind of can sometimes put those things together, then those can collapse down because it's all sort of dynamically calculated. So if you suddenly understand the birth name and the identity and the visual person are all the same person, you'll think much differently about them than you did before, provided you have events around attached to any of those things. It also added kind of this complication where every question that could be asked in the game about a person suddenly needed to understand the context that it was in. Like, I'm not just asking about this person anymore. I'm asking about them, did you see this? Or then it would use the visual identity. Like, did you see the person with the long black beard running, over here with this artifact? Or did you see, Urist, the person we grew up with, holding this artifact? Or did you see Ali's, this rumored Ali's, who's actually a secret identity for some human spy? Did you see that person? And the person over there has to take that query and find the best possible reputation for it and pull them together, and then not screw up like the text production in the game either. So it's kind of just this really, really long slog of just updating the data. And kind of side point for the programmer people out there that might be cringing with like the birth name and the secret identity being stored differently, because it could all just be kind of the same, and the visual identity for that matter could all be squashed into some kind of very homogeneous sort of identifier. It's all legacy code and save compatibility and stuff. We would ideally like to have more generalized system here. So as an example here, say that you only heard that sort of, say, Ali's, that identity, stole a amulet from an elf. That human thinking about that down there, such as it is with that drawing, but the human thinking about that, if they think that this secret identity is part of their own civilization and they didn't really like that elf, they'll have a positive reaction to that. And if they do realize later on that it is a sort of goblin spy, then it has to go through this whole thing of like civilization affiliations and what do you think of that civilization. Excuse me. There isn't really like a thing about like it's a spy. That was like a betrayal or something. So there's this kind of missing element to the reputation calculations. But I don't know. I assume I had more on this example, but I'm kind of frazzled right now. So the other thing that was interesting about this was that, as I said, the kidnap victims were raised in the Goblin Society, and the game kind of gives you your sort of ethical framework as you grow up, not in any kind of complicated way at all. You like get your religion at age 6 for no reason, right? But stuff like that leads to these spies. They would at first, when we were debugging this stuff, on our first test, we'd have a spy enter a human village, and they would just have their goblin ethics on. So they were like, all right, I see a bunch of strangers here, and we don't like strangers, and they just started killing people. It's something that we had to work out, and they still have two minds, which is kind of cool, right? It's like what we're going for in the end. But they had to decide, okay, I'm gonna use the host civilization's whole ethical framework, and you still have that kind of goblin opinions and a lot of things on the inside. So if you're the player talking to them, you sometimes get an impression that this guy's kind of like a nihilistic burnout or whatever. But it's something that we're still working with the feeling of that, but we did leverage it in some specific instances. For instance, the prophet uh, cover identity. They generate this a prophecy about, say, how the world is going to end or what everybody's sort of just reward is. And right now, just as sort of a gameplay thing more than anything else, the spies don't have access to what the culture is actually like, and they'll generate a random prophecy for a god of the culture. So they might be walking around ranting about how one of the ocean god is going to destroy the world with fire in 500 years, and the citizens themselves, as I've drawn there, should react badly to that, but they don't right now. But it's something for the player to notice, and we'd like ideally in the future to have the spies kind of have different skill levels so that they could come in and sort of seamlessly do the profit routine, or just do a really terrible job of it. Now, another kind of problem that we ran into here that we've partially fixed and partially just kind of left because it's hard is asking a spy. So that you walk up to a spy, or some other character walks up to a spy that's just sitting in the town with a secret identity, and you ask them about their original self. You may have heard, like, the child that was kidnapped from the tower or something, right? You'd know their real name. And you ask them, hey, where can I find this person? I'd really like to rescue this kidnapped child. And you're talking to the kidnapped child who knows it, but is also under a secret identity right now. And the problem with the game is that it was like we put in a lot of work to make this particular kind of lie possible. Just the fact that you have a secret identity, and it required all of this work, but doing like general lies floating around would just be a huge drain on the system. We haven't figured out how to do that. So that dwarf can't actually lie about this. And kind of the smart cover that would be not that much work is that they just kind of try and brush it off, or try and plead ignorance as to the question without being so specific that it gets stored as a rumor, because it can't store false rumors. And so what actually happens here is you go up to the dwarf, you ask him, hey, where can I find this kidnapped child? And the dwarf there, who is the kidnapped child, who's spying, says, like, they're very nearby right now. Great. Can we go find them? And you can actually hire the dwarf as a guide if they're predisposed to that kind of thing. And they'll instantly end the guiding and just say, well, we found them. That's great. If they could ask for money, we don't have money, but if they could ask for money, they'd want to be paid. But they don't. They have this thing about not revealing their real name either, so they never actually say, you found me. It's just kind of weird right now. So in terms of like where we want to go with this is the sort of future part of the talk or whatever. Right now, the visual identity is just stored by identifier. It's like the simplest thing you can imagine, just like visual identity 23 because that's person 23. But we'd really like to kind of get into stuff that we can use later for, say, criminal justice investigations or whatever. Where the scars matter, the eye color matters, the clothing matters, the state of the clothing matters. Does it have tears? Are there blood stains? All that kind of thing. And we have this whole sort of fantasy problem of shape shifting, lovingly rendered on the screen there, with a dwarf turning into a were or something under the full moon, and that's it's sort of a workman-like problem, like just going through and adding things. I think it won't be that much of a difficulty. The hard part, as I mentioned, is like lies. You kind of want to add more lies into the system so the spies can kind of be more spy-like and do spy-like things. But it's probably been talked about quite a bit, kicking around just how hard that is to store false data in the system, especially when you have rumors that are passed around sometimes between like 10,000 people. So it's that's difficult, especially the fact where if you've got like 5 of these things sitting in your head, and then you have to decide like what you think in some kind of reliable way is more likely to be true. And it's just it's kind of a nightmare we've avoided up to this point. And kind of The final thing I just haven't mentioned is that the player can actually do this right now in the game. You can assume a secret identity, go cause trouble, and as long as no one knows who you were, it'll attach to the secret identity instead of you. They'll also have visual information, of course, if you just start a bar fight or something under a false name. But it won't get back to your birth name unless you actually see someone from your childhood who's like, hey, what are you doing, or whatever. So, and we like to expand that, of course. We want to get the whole sort of John Le Carre thing going. Could you run a spy ring, something like that? It's kind of we're taking steps along to get to that point. So yeah, that's the talk, which I haven't checked the chat, so hopefully it worked at all. Yay! So Q&A, I guess, over here. Excuse me. So I guess I'm reading questions like people. Tanya said earlier, right? That they scroll up through the top. So I can see right now, will masks be a thing? Excuse me. That's exactly what I'm talking about with like the clothing, and that's a better one because it like also has this ability of hiding the appearance. And yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a thing that we were like thinking about, how to do it. It'd be like the first sort of clothing plus physical identity thing that we're talking about. Yeah, exactly. And not yet. They won't be a thing yet. Not until we get more information about stored in those things. But exactly, that's what we're going for. So weren't vampires already a form of secret identities? I did have a brief slide about that earlier in the talk. That indeed they were simple, and we've expanded it a great deal. You can go back and watch the stream, and we get into that a little bit. So revealing of secret identities and the reconciliation of them. Yeah. So fortunately, and this is kind of a saving grace of the whole system, what people have stored in their heads for like about a year's worth of data is rumors. The rumor is like either this identity or this real name or this visual or any combination of that has done this thing. And so when someone reveals a secret identity, that sort of collapses down automatically. All of the things about reputation, everything just falls out of it. And really all the person needs to store in their head is, do I have that linkage? They have this little linkage thing they have, like, do I know the person's true name or not? It's just a flag. And do I have and they have kind of a binary list or whatever of identity numbers of the IDs, which are stored as second excuse me again. The secret identities are stored as their own data structure with the ID number, and then it just links in all the ID numbers of secret identities, and so it can collapse down in like this little thing in their head. There's also just a flag that says, do I know what this person looks like? And that's it. I mean, that do I know what this person looks like has to be linked to the true name and the identities as well. So there's just this little triad of information, and rumors filter into that just dynamically, and it pops out this sort of 30-facet reputation array and reactions and how I should think about this. But that can change dynamically. The problem is after a year, you get too much data, and so you have to just do a final filtering through whatever you know at the time and then store that permanently. And then you've just kind of like, I think you're a thief and I don't know why. And that's just something we have to live with because of memory constraints. So question, once you have the functionality to take on a different identity, could you use this for non-spy purposes, shameful secrets, escaping tragic pasts? Absolutely. There's nothing about secret identities that are spy linked right now, aside from the fact that spies use them. That's yeah. I mean, you could use that right now to avoid the fact, like if your adventurer accidentally killed a peasant, as people sometimes do in role-playing games for some reason, you could just change who you are if you want to keep that game going, as long as it doesn't catch up with you. So yeah, it's cool. What came automatically it was actually really nice. Question: secret identities on top of secret identities. Like, what if a spy gets recruited by a spy? You can have as many secret identities as you want. Keep switching them. Of course, your visual data right now is really simple, so it only works up to a point. But we do have in excuse me, in world generation at least, It happens more just because the stuff's a little crunchier and faster in world generation, like the whole history. I mean, like that kind of world generation, where spies will kind of become not quite double agents, but they'll feed each other information, and neither of them knows. They like think they've turned each other. There's a sort of information source reputation link that gets put in, and then they kind of feed each other stuff, but not knowingly. And like the knowing aspect of that would be more interesting. We're trying our best to add stuff in, but you do get a bit of that now. It's kind of exciting. The sort of what could be aspect of this is really really exciting for us, given our interests growing up. Okay, so it scrolled a little bit, so I did that one. Can someone disguise themselves from someone who knows their appearance? Not right now. That's kind of the mask question that was asked before. Just haven't put in the clothing aspect of it, either the obscuring fact of the clothing or anything about clothing or appearance at all. And we're kind of working to think about how that could be kind of put in kind of easily. Next update when? Well, we were trying to get it this month. It's going to be like a 50-50 thing, but then next month after that or whatever, it's going well. We're just cleaning up the last stuff. This is all in the game right now without any work needing to be done on it except for a little tuning. Plans to add proper lying to the game. So I talked about that a little bit at the end, just the fact that it's a nightmare, and I don't know yet if it's going to be like case by case, like the identity thing, where you add in one specific type of lie. It's like, now I can lie about where my house is or something like that. Or if it's just going to be, now you can float random rumor data structures that have any crap in them at all, and we've sort of worked it out, and people are just going to act really weird sometimes because they know your house is in two different places, and they're like, I do not know what to do with this. So yeah, I mean it's hopefully. There already were demons masking themselves as good entities, right? Yes, that is a different secret identity. The one where the demon pretends to be a god and takes over say a human civilization as its ruler because it's masquerading as a god, because the demon has some property that aligns with like the domains of the god. Like they're both sort of water oriented, so the demon is just allowed to do that. And haven't really, I mean, it's the same data structures and stuff, but we haven't jumped into that. We haven't like said, okay, the adventurer is now like running around pretending to be a god or whatever, or that a spy would, excuse me again, would try to do that. Yeah, I mean, it's true that like the vampire, that was another previous example, and we didn't really work with it that much. Follow up: multiple secret identities be on top of each other or in parallel. Right now, you're just kind of like, this is the identity I'm using to speak. That's really all you have. This is the identity I'm using to speak, how I'm presenting myself. What another person knows is up to them. Like if you just flip right in front of them, they're going to be like, I know you as two different people, and that's how I think of you, and you're not fooling anybody. But you could just be talking to one person and then talking to another person, maybe even in the same room right now. It's really kind of weird. And they would kind of not compare notes until there is this kind of compare notes feature when you get out of town. Then people kind of dump some of the rumors together. Can you disguise yourself as a deceased character? The identity you can assume, there is like with the people pretending to be gods, there is like a historical figure aspect to it. You can say like, I am historical figure this, but I don't think we messed around with that for spies because it was going to add like way too many sort of complications. So like even pretending to be someone who's alive, not someone who's deceased. So yeah, but we're hoping to kind of do that. I'm going to kind of dodge questions about other stuff because this conference was organized by AI people. But yeah, feel free to send me emails and stuff about like sieges and boats and all that kind of thing. Let's see, maybe lies and secret identities could be managed as claims, which could be verified. Yeah, I mean it's I don't really have much of an idea. I mean it's just the sheer weight, of the load of data going around, like even just storing 2 bits of information is like, I believe this or this might be true. I mean, they would be sitting there as rumors, right? There's nothing that says right now that the rumors that are in your head are things that you believe, except for the fact that that's obviously true right now. So they would just be kind of sitting there to work with. And in fact, if I plugged in a false rumor into someone's brain right now, excuse me again, if I plugged a false rumor into someone's brain right now, they would just get both reputation benefits. So they would essentially be weighing them evenly. They're like, I believe you stole this book, and I also believe that you brought this book back rightfully to, preserve knowledge in our civilization. You'd get the knowledge preserver and the thief sort of reputation just sitting on top of each other, and they would treat you both ways. And they even have a way of expressing that right now, because sometimes that happens with nothing but true information. They're like, you're a knowledge preserver and a thief, and I'm conflicted about that. Attacking someone in a secret identity, change your loyalty with respect to the secret or original identity. So, excuse me. So loyalty is a thing that we've mostly resolved into a rumor state. So fortunately it works. That's the sort of thing that I say, and then I get 10,000 bug reports talking about, cascade, like what are they called, tantrum spirals and all the kind of broken stuff. But ideally, because things are stored as rumors and incidents, that secret identity information is in there and doesn't ruin what's going on over in the original data. And spies that are not adventurers or secret identity holders that are not adventurers, their loyalties they keep them in their heads themselves, and they do things according to their interests. So nothing changes there. If discovered by your dwarves, how will the spy situation be resolved? Well, I mean, players typically resolve things with magma and throwing things under bridges and so forth. We haven't allowed you to issue an arrest warrant. That was a question that came up recently in our Q&A. It's like, well, can we actually arrest these people? No, they'll have to deal with it the old-fashioned way. Okay, so yeah, we're getting to the last question. Is there any plans for big Nemesis or Civ complicated AI planning? Well, taking that in the vein of spies and stuff, the talk. We'd like to have this kind of sort of spy ring planning and other sort of more intricate schemes you're running on people, and that's kind of like a one-by-one thing. So yeah, it's up to the organizers if we're going to answer the last question here, the Zunbill question. I sit and await all judgments. Excuse me. Okay, definitely the last question, because I think they want to cut this off. If someone tells a lie, can someone expect that they're lying without having... Okay, and I better read this carefully. If someone tells a lie, can someone expect that they're lying without having any evidence and investigate? Can someone suspect someone? So the only lies they can tell right now are about themselves. Like I was saying, there aren't actually any lies in the system except for the secret identities right now. And suspicion there, like I had with that false prophet thing, we really just haven't put non-player character suspicion in the game, except when it finally is like, I've seen you, and the reputation collapses. For the player, it's more like up to them to do it. And as far as the future, love to do anything we can, manage. And that's kind of all there is to it. Okay, so yeah, nice to meet everybody. Glad the cat didn't cut out the thing, and I'm glad you enjoy singing so much, because that's kind of scary.